Thunder rolled across the grey New York sky as rain lashed the windows of a mansion that sat like a fortress on the hill. Inside, lights burned through the night. Servants hurried in silence, and armed guards stood at every door. The house belonged to Don Alessandro Marino, a name whispered in fear throughout the city. He was the man who made millionaires bow and rivals disappear, a man whose empire stretched across oceans. Yet that night all his power meant nothing. On the second floor, in a room once filled with laughter and sunlight, his 12-year-old son, Luca, lay motionless on a hospital bed. His skin was pale, his lips barely moved, and the rhythmic beeping of machines filled the silence. The boy had fallen ill 3 months ago, collapsing suddenly after a mild fever. At first everyone thought it was exhaustion, maybe stress from school. But soon his body began shutting down, his speech slurred, his muscles stiffened, and he could no longer stand. Alessandro had flown in doctors from Italy, Germany, Japan, every name that could be bought with money. 100 doctors, 100 diagnoses, 100 failures. Not one could explain what was killing his son. Every night, the once mighty Don sat in the shadows of his son's room, gripping the boy's frail hand. He didn't eat, barely slept, and the men who feared him now whispered that their boss was breaking from the inside. One night, after another failed treatment, the lead specialist lowered his eyes and said quietly, "I'm sorry, Mr. Marino, we've done everything we can." Alessandro's jaw tightened, his hands trembled. He walked the man to the door without a word. Then, when the doctor left, Alessandro smashed the table with his fists, roaring like a wounded animal. His cry echoed through the mansion like thunder. "What's the use of power," he shouted, "if I can't save my own blood?" Downstairs, among the servants who cleaned the marble floors, a woman froze at the sound. Her name was Grace. She was one of the night cleaners, quiet and humble, the kind of person no one noticed even though she'd worked in that house for years. But tonight, as she heard her boss's anguish, something stirred inside her. She thought of her own daughter, Amara. Amara was 23, brilliant and stubborn, a young woman who'd fought her way through poverty to study medicine at a small community college. While other kids gave up, Amara stayed up late under flickering lights, reading textbooks borrowed from libraries, practicing her skills by volunteering at clinics that barely had supplies. Grace had always known her daughter was special. Ever since Amara was little, she'd shown a gift, a way of seeing what others missed. When kids scraped their knees or caught fevers, she'd mix herbs her mother taught her to use, whispering prayers as she applied them. "You're going to heal the world one day," Grace always told her, but those words felt far away now. Grace worked double shifts to pay Amara's tuition, mopping marble floors while her daughter studied medicine. Others said she could never afford. That night, as Grace cleaned the silent halls, she whispered a prayer under her breath. Lord, if only they'd let her try. But she knew better. People like them weren't listened to. In the world of the rich and powerful, maids didn't make suggestions and their children didn't touch lives that mattered. Still, something in her heart refused to stay quiet. Later that night, Alessandro sat beside Luca's bed again. The boy's breathing had grown shallow, and his small hand felt cold in his father's. For the first time, the Mafia Boss, the man who never bowed to anyone, bowed his head and wept. "Luca, please," he whispered, his voice breaking, "don't leave me." Just then the door creaked softly. A voice came from behind, gentle but firm. "Sir?" Alessandro turned sharply. It was Grace, clutching her cleaning rag, her eyes full of tears. "Get out!" he snapped. "This is no place for staff." She hesitated. "Sir, please forgive me, but I heard about your boy. I think maybe my daughter could help." The room fell silent. Alessandro rose slowly from his chair. "Your daughter?" His tone was calm but dangerous. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" Grace nodded, trembling but resolute. "Yes, sir, I do. But I also know what it's like to watch your child suffer. My daughter is studying medicine. She's brilliant. She's been researching rare conditions, and she's helped people before when doctors couldn't find answers." Alessandro's eyes hardened. "A student? You think some girl from the street knows more than world-class physicians?" "I don't think that," Grace said softly. "I just believe everyone deserves one more chance, even your boy." He stared at her for a long time, fury and despair battling in his expression. "If you're wrong," he said finally, "I'll make sure you regret it." Grace swallowed but didn't back down. "If I'm right," she said, "you'll get your son back." Alessandro turned toward the window, rain streaking down the glass. After a long pause, he muttered, "Bring her." Grace blinked, not believing what she'd heard. "Sir, you heard me," he said, voice low and tired. "Bring your daughter. If she fails, both of you will never set foot here again." Grace bowed her head. "Thank you, sir." When she left the room, tears streamed down her face, not of fear but of hope. For the first time in months, the mansion's air shifted just slightly. Upstairs, Alessandro sat back down beside his son, watching the boy's chest rise and fall. "If she's a fraud," he whispered to himself, "I'll destroy her. But if she's right," his voice trailed off. The rain outside softened. Somewhere deep down, in the cold heart of a man who once believed in nothing, a small flicker of faith began to stir. And in a tiny apartment across the city, a young woman named Amara received a trembling call from her mother, one that would change not only the life of a dying boy, but the destiny of everyone who touched him. Rain still fell softly the next morning when Amara Marino stood at the massive iron gates of the Mafia Boss's mansion. Her breath fogged in the cold air, and her fingers trembled as she clutched her old leather medical kit, the same one she used during her volunteer shifts at the free clinic downtown. Her heart pounded, not from fear of the storm but from what her mother had told her the night before. The Don of New York's most feared crime family had given her permission to try and save his dying son. She didn't know whether to see it as a blessing or a death sentence. The guard at the gate scanned her nervously before pressing the intercom. "The boss is expecting her," came a deep voice from inside. The gates creaked open, revealing a long driveway lined with statues and black cars. Amara felt tiny walking up to the front door, every step echoing louder than her heartbeat. When she entered the mansion, she was struck by how beautiful and lifeless it felt at the same time. The marble floors gleamed like mirrors, chandeliers hung like frozen stars, and the silence pressed against her ears. Her mother, Grace, was waiting near the staircase, her eyes glistening with pride and worry. "Baby," she whispered, taking Amara's hands, "just do what you were born to do." Amara smiled faintly. "So you believe in me enough for both of us?" Grace wiped her eyes and led her down the hall toward Luca's room. The door opened slowly, and the air inside was heavy with the smell of disinfectant and despair. Machines beeped softly around a small pale boy whose chest rose and fell weakly. Alessandro sat beside him, dressed in black, his sharp eyes fixed on the stranger who dared enter his world. "So you're the girl," he said in a low, skeptical tone. Amara nodded. "Yes, sir. My men tell me you're not a doctor." "Not yet," she admitted, her voice steady. "But I've studied enough to understand the body, and I see things differently." "Differently?" Alessandro scoffed. 100 of the best couldn't save him. "You think you'll do better?" Amara took a slow breath. "I don't think I'm better, sir. I just think maybe everyone else was looking in the wrong direction." Alessandro's gaze was cold, but there was something desperate in it too. He gestured toward the boy. "You have 5 minutes. If he suffers because of you, I'll end it." Grace flinched, but Amara didn't. She moved to Luca's bedside and knelt down, her hands gentle as she examined him. His pulse was faint but rhythmic. She checked his pupils, his breathing pattern, the small twitches in his fingers. Something didn't make sense. She studied his neck and wrists and noticed faint reddish marks, almost invisible unless you looked closely. They weren't the kind of marks left by illness. They were something else. "When did this start?" she asked quietly. Alessandro frowned. 3 months ago. Fever at first, then paralysis. They've tested for everything. "Everything but the truth," she murmured. Then she asked for his medical records and the list of every medicine, supplement, or herb given to him. The staff looked confused, but Alessandro ordered them to comply. As Amara scanned the lists, her sharp eyes caught a name, an imported herbal blend used for stress relief. Most wouldn't notice it, but Amara's mother had used similar herbs back in their old neighborhood, and one rare ingredient in it, when mixed with certain antibiotics, could cause severe neurological poisoning. "You've been giving him this tea every day?" she asked. Alessandro nodded impatiently. "The doctors prescribed it to calm his body. It's killing him," she said softly. The room froze. "What did you say?" Alessandro's voice was sharp. Amara looked up, steady but compassionate. It's not a disease, sir. It's an allergic neurotoxin reaction, slow poisoning from an herbal compound interacting with his medication. It mimics paralysis and brain failure. Impossible, one of the staff muttered. We would have seen it. Not if you weren't looking for it, Amara replied calmly. This type of compound breaks down differently. It leaves no common trace. But if I'm right, I can flush it out. Alessandro stepped closer, towering over her. You're saying all these doctors missed what you found in 10 minutes? I'm saying they didn't see your son, she replied. They saw a case. I saw a boy. Her words cut through the air like a blade. Alessandro stared at her in silence. Then he growled, Do it. Amara nodded and opened her kit. Inside were small vials, syringes, and herbs she'd prepared for emergencies at the clinic. She mixed a neutralizing solution using activated charcoal and saline, then prepared an IV infusion. Grace stood beside her silently, praying under her breath. For 2 hours Amara worked, adjusting dosages, monitoring his heartbeat, gently massaging his stiff hands. The room was so quiet that even the machines seemed to pause. At first nothing changed. Then slowly the boy's breathing steadied. His pulse, once faint and irregular, began to even out. The nurse gasped. Alessandro leaned forward, his eyes wide. What's happening? His body is fighting back, Amara said softly. He's responding. A flicker of life appeared in Luca's fingers. They twitched. Amara smiled faintly. He's trying to move. Alessandro fell to his knees beside the bed, gripping his son's hand. Luca, can you hear me? The boy didn't respond, but the monitors showed improvement. Tears welled in Alessandro's eyes, though he quickly wiped them away. You did this? He whispered. You really did this? Amara looked up at him, exhaustion on her face but hope in her eyes. It's just the beginning, sir. He's not safe yet. His body needs time to cleanse the toxins, but if we continue this treatment for 48 hours, he'll wake up. Alessandro stared at her for a long moment. And if he doesn't? Then I'll accept whatever you decide, she said quietly. But I won't stop trying. For the first time, the Mafia Boss looked at someone with something other than power or fear. He looked at her with respect. You have 2 days, he said. Whatever you need, you'll have it. As the hours passed, Amara refused to rest. She monitored Luca, adjusted fluids, and whispered encouragements in his ear as if he could hear her. Grace stayed by her side, bringing warm cloths, praying softly, her heart swelling with pride. By morning, Luca's complexion looked better. The dark circles beneath his eyes faded slightly. Amara leaned back in her chair, her voice hoarse but steady. He's fighting. Alessandro, standing behind her, said in a low voice, If you save him, you'll save me too. Amara turned, confused. He didn't explain. But for the first time, the man who'd built an empire on fear saw hope in a girl who had nothing but knowledge and kindness. As dawn broke over the mansion, the rain stopped. A single ray of sunlight fell across Luca's face, and for the first time in months his eyelids fluttered. Papa, he whispered weakly. Alessandro froze, his body trembling. Luca, his voice cracked. The boy's lips moved again. Papa, it was faint but real. The Mafia Boss fell to his knees, tears spilling freely now. Amara smiled through her exhaustion. He's coming back. Alessandro grasped her hand, something he'd never done for anyone. Please, save him, he whispered. I'll give you anything. Amara shook her head softly. I don't want anything, sir. Just let him live. The morning sun finally broke through the clouds, painting the mansion in shades of gold and peace that had not touched it in months. The storm had passed, and with it, the dark silence that had haunted the house. Amara sat by Luca's bedside, her eyes red from exhaustion, her hands still resting on the monitor lines that traced his recovery. Grace stood beside her, holding a tray of warm tea, her smile trembling with hope. Across the room, Alessandro sat in stunned silence, watching his son sleep peacefully for the first time since the nightmare began. For a long while no one spoke. It was as if the entire mansion was afraid to break the miracle that had finally arrived. Then, slowly, Luca stirred. His small fingers flexed, his eyes fluttered open, and when he saw his father, a weak but unmistakable smile formed on his lips. Papa, he whispered. The word shattered Alessandro's composure. He grabbed his son's hand, pressing it against his face as tears streamed freely down his cheeks. "Luca, my boy." "You're here," he whispered, his voice trembling with gratitude and disbelief. Grace covered her mouth, crying silently. Amara exhaled deeply, her heart swelling with relief. For her, it wasn't just a victory of medicine. It was a triumph of faith and humanity. Within hours, the news spread through the mansion like wildfire. Guards who had long faces just a day before whispered that the Don's son was alive. The servants who had moved like ghosts began smiling again. Even the walls seemed to breathe. Alessandro didn't leave his son's side that day. He called in nutritionists, nurses, and therapists, all under Amara's direction. For once, the boss who commanded the city now listened to a young woman who came from nothing. When Luca managed to eat his first spoon of soup, Alessandro turned to Amara with eyes that had softened beyond recognition. "You saved him," he said quietly. "Tell me how I can repay you." Amara shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, sir. I didn't do it for a reward. I did it because no one deserves to lose their child." Her voice was simple, pure, but it cut through the room like a prayer. Alessandro looked down, ashamed. For a man who had built his empire on blood and fear, compassion was a language he had long forgotten. That night, as Luca slept peacefully, Alessandro walked alone through the halls of his mansion. The same halls that had echoed with screams, orders, and threats. Now they felt different. He found Grace in the kitchen, cleaning quietly as always. When she saw him, she froze, unsure if she should bow or speak. "Sit," he said softly. She hesitated, then obeyed. For a long moment, Alessandro stared at the floor before whispering, "I owe you more than I can ever repay. I've spent my life making people fear my name, but I couldn't even protect my own son. And yet the daughter of a cleaning lady did what I could not." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Sir, I don't want anything from you. I just wanted you to have hope again." Alessandro's voice cracked. "I never believed in God, Grace, but now I think he sent your daughter to me." Days turned into weeks, and Luca grew stronger with every sunrise. He began to walk again, slowly at first, but soon his laughter filled the garden where only sorrow had lived. The mansion came alive with sound and light. Alessandro made sure Amara and Grace had everything they needed during their stay. But more than wealth or luxury, he offered them something far rarer: respect. He would often be found sitting with Amara in the evenings, asking her about her studies, her dreams, her vision for the future. "I want to open a clinic one day," she told him once. "Somewhere for families who can't afford the help they need." Alessandro smiled faintly. "And you will," he said. "Whatever it takes, I'll make sure you do." When the day finally came for Amara and Grace to leave the mansion, the entire staff gathered at the door to see them off. Luca ran to Amara, throwing his arms around her waist. "Don't go," he said softly. "You're my angel." She knelt, smiling through her tears. "You don't need an angel anymore, Luca. You just need to live." Alessandro approached, his expression unreadable. Then, to everyone's shock, he bowed his head slightly. "You've changed me," he said simply. "I can't erase what I've done, but I can choose what I'll do next." He handed her a folded document. "This is for your clinic. Fully funded. No debts, no strings," Grace gasped. "So we can't—" "You can," he interrupted. "Because this isn't charity. It's redemption." Years passed. Amara's clinic opened in the heart of the city. A bright building where children laughed, families healed, and no one was ever turned away for lack of money. People called it the House of Hope. On the wall hung a small plaque that read, "For Luca, proof that miracles still happen." The clinic became famous, not for its luxury, but for its compassion. Doctors from around the country came to learn from Amara, whose methods blended science and empathy in ways no textbook could teach. Grace retired and spent her days helping organize the clinic's community events, her heart full of gratitude. One bright afternoon, during the clinic's anniversary celebration, a black car pulled up outside. The crowd turned as Alessandro stepped out, older now, his once cold face softened by time. Beside him was Luca, taller, healthy, smiling. They walked up to Amara, and Alessandro handed her a white envelope. "It's time you expanded," he said, his voice humble. "A second clinic, wherever you choose. You gave me my son. Let me give others the same chance." Amara smiled, tears in her eyes. "You've already done enough, sir." Alessandro shook his head. "No, you didn't just heal my son. You healed me." The crowd applauded as Amara took the stage to speak. Cameras flashed and her voice carried across the courtyard. "Once," she said, "the world told me that a cleaning lady's daughter could never stand beside the powerful. But I learned something greater, that healing doesn't come from titles, money, or fame. It comes from love. It comes from seeing people as human no matter who they are." She paused, her eyes shining as she looked toward Grace, Alessandro, and Luca. 100 doctors couldn't heal a dying boy because they saw a patient. I saw a child. And that changed everything. As the audience rose in applause, Alessandro and Grace stood side by side, two souls from different worlds, united by one miracle. Luca laughed, looking up at the sky, free and alive. In that moment, the city that once feared Alessandro Marino whispered a different name with reverence, the name of Amara, the black genius daughter of a cleaning lady, who proved that compassion could do what power never could. And somewhere deep within the crowd, Grace clasped her hands, tears running down her cheeks, whispering, "Thank you, Lord, my baby did it." The light of that day lingered long after the crowd went home, illuminating a truth that would echo forever. Sometimes, the greatest healers come from the humblest hands, and sometimes even the coldest hearts can be saved by love.